Welcome, everyone.
Hmm.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's great to see everybody here today. Come on in, take a seat. I see lots of familiar faces. I see lots of new faces here today. Welcome to our live MEA Fireside chat with Chip and Jeff Hamaoui and Zach Bush. Oh, it's going to be a great one today. So as you're getting settled, feel free to turn on your cameras. We love to see each other. Feel free to put it in the gallery view if you would like to, so you can poke around and see each other. How many of you, this is your very first time to come to an MEA event? Just kind of wave at me if this is your first time. Wonderful, welcome. We love to think of this as just this big Italian table that we get together and we get to hang out and watch this fireside chat in real time. So just to get a sense of where everybody is and where you're from, I'm going to teach you how to use the chat. If you don't know yet, then you've probably not been here on the planet for the last couple of years. But just in case you don't know, go down to that chat box and throw in your name and where are you in the world. We often have folks coming literally from all over the world. I see Sembe, who's here from Japan. We have folks here from Australia. Finland. It's a little bit late for Europeans, but some of my Night Owl Europeans will be here.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Look at that. Johannesburg, South Africa. Great. A global community that we get to share here together. New Zealand is here. Canada is here. The US, of course. Wonderful. 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 Feel free to use that chat to post questions as we go along. If you do have a specific question, like a tech issue or something, you can click that little arrow next to the chat and find me, and I'll be happy to help you. We also, a little bit later on in the program, will be giving you a chance to come up on stage and ask a question. The best way to do that is to raise your hand in the reactions button. Now, we're not going to call on you right now, but in a little while we will, and then you can get your chance in. People usually jump on that button, so they make sure they have a chance to ask a question, but we'll let you know when that will be. So with that, let me put the team up here on Spotlight and get out of the way. I'm really happy to introduce Chip Conley and Jeff Hamaoui, co-founders of the Modern Elder Academy, and really fun to see the two of them together running this live fireside chat, and I'll let them bring up Zach. Take it away, you guys.
All right. Well, thank you, Carrie. You are amazing at pulling all this together, making us look good. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We are so honored to have Dr. Zach Bush with us. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was outside of Mexico City for a 50th birthday party for someone from the San Francisco Bay Area who actually now lives in Miami, which seems to be a trend. A lot of people doing that. So I was there to give a talk about midlife and what it's like to turn 50 and after. And Zach was there to talk about what it's like to turn midlife as a planet. And so I got to listen to Zach speak, and I've watched Zach's videos before. I have talked with Jeff, who we'll talk in a moment here, about how much he really admires Zach on so many levels. And then to see him in person, giving a talk right after my talk, wow, I loved it. And I am so pleased that we are able to introduce him to our MEA broader community. And I'm going to let Jeff say a couple things, and then we'll bring Zach up.
Yeah, this is kind of neat. Our 4 goals as an organization are sort of 4 ideals, sort of to regenerate the soil, regenerate the soul, to regenerate community, and regenerate purpose. And man, have I had a hard time explaining how those things all link together, both internally and externally, and in the long, dark tea time of the soul. So imagine my joy and my surprise to find Dr. Zach Bush, Zach, I was looking at your organization, Seraphic Group, which is basically restoring natural cycles to human health, ecology, and community. Boom, there it is. My guide and my mentor through this mess of how these things all fit together. It's such a pleasure to have you here. It really is.
Thrilled to be with both of you. It's a real great opportunity to be with your whole community here. Thank you all for joining. It's a huge global community that you guys represent, and it's an element within our society that has become, I think, symptomatic of our greater disconnect with nature, is our connection to wisdom and wisdom keepers. And I believe that all of you are holding wisdom that is desperately needed for the planet right now. You guys have watched the human pendulum swing towards this extremity of disconnect. And for that, you've seen the destruction of a planet in your lifetime. In the last 50 years, we've seen 50% of life on Earth disappear. We've seen 97% of biodiversity in many spheres of the world disappear. We are seeing the active collapse of in North Africa, Central Africa now, the rainforests of the world disappearing beneath our feet. And for that, we see massive devastation of biodiversity around the planet. And we see these dire predictions of our own extinction within the context of this massive acceleration of extinction of species that we've engineered over the last 50 years. So 10,000 times increase in rate of extinction in just the last few decades. And so with that 10,000x acceleration, you guys are witness to it, and you guys remember a world that our children today have no knowledge of. You guys remember what the streets looked like in your communities. You guys remember what the parks look like. You guys remember what the number of insects on your windshield when you got home from the road trip, and you're realizing that, wow, that doesn't happen anymore. Your windshield stays clean all the way to work. What the hell is going on? Where is life on Earth going to? And we have this frightening situation where our 30-something-year-olds, our 40-something-year-olds even don't remember a planet that was vital. And so they don't realize, just as the frog in the boiling water, that we are at a crisis point of survival. And so there's, due to just a lack of experience of what the world so recently looked like. And so you guys are holding not just wisdom of your own lifetimes and the own sense of self and the importance of grounding into a soul purpose. You guys remember a planet that was still home to human life. And we now, in just a short 50 years, have divorced ourselves so thoroughly from planet Earth that we find ourselves in this extinction event. So I see you guys as our umbilical cord back to a history in which life was supported on the planet.
Wow, tell us a little bit about your history, your personal history, because you were a doctor of humans that has become a doctor to the planet. Like, how did that happen?
In the interest of time, I'm going to do this as quick as I can because that was a 50-year journey. So short answer is I was never thought of myself as terribly intelligent or intellectual. I really loved working with my hands. So I was worked in classic car restoration and automotive industry, and in high school loved classic cars and building four-wheel drives in the mountains of Colorado as an Eagle Scout. Loved camping all the time. I decided I'd go into an engineering program and think about robotics as an area of expertise. Loved building things. I made money to pay myself through college doing both construction and landscaping and all this. And so always working with my hands, didn't see myself as terribly intellectually inspired. My sister was the brainiac of the family of 4 kids, and she went off to Stanford and did all the smart stuff. And so this blue collar kid from Boulder, Colorado was out to build cool things. And so I then, like only a 19-year-old can, had my heart broken by my first girlfriend, and decided I was so devastated that I must take a year off to recover from my heartbreak. So dramatic. And so in that moment of taking that year off, an aunt called me up and said, hey, you want to come to the Philippines and birth babies with a group of international midwives? I was like, whoa, that's outside of my experience zone. That sounds interesting. And so I worked in a tire shop for 6 months to make enough money to get myself over to the Philippines and lived there for 6 months, and worked with this group of international midwives. And the very first baby I birthed over there, I was in the back of a old Volkswagen van cruising through the streets of the Philippines at high speed at 3 o'clock in the morning. My aunt was driving because there was a woman hemorrhaging with a preterm birth, and she was born mentally handicapped herself, and so she didn't know she was pregnant. She was nonverbal, couldn't communicate, and she was hemorrhaging. And I had this little infant stillborn into my hands that was about the size of my hand. It was head to toe, the size of my hand, and this little purple baby born into my hands, and it really instantly changed my life of getting to witness the perfect design of the human body, even in the most extreme levels of malnutrition and devastating poverty and everything else. The perfection of that infant was so overwhelming that the toenails were invisible, and yet you could sense that each toenail was there in its perfection, the 10 toes, the 10 fingers, the perfect little face. And then after a few minutes, this little infant took a breath and came alive in my hand. And so I got to experience what it feels like when biology animates with life, and you can't look backwards at that moment. And I couldn't go back. With the idea of building robots was suddenly a dead endpoint, and I needed to work in this miracle of life. So that was my birth point. Not terribly successful student, and so the idea of going to medical school didn't come to mind very quickly. Started going to college, pre-med, thinking I could go into nursing or go maybe be a physician assistant or something like that. But as I started getting into biology, I started getting to be a better student. I started to express a base of understanding and systems thinking that I hadn't known was in me before. And finally, I didn't get into med school the first year, got in the second time I tried. And within the first few days of gross anatomy, dissecting a human body for 4 months, I suddenly had a system to learn. And it was like taking a car apart, where suddenly, when you actually know what a spark plug is and you actually know what a distributor does, suddenly a car becomes very simple and compelling, and you can start to become cooperative, part of the system once you understand it. And I was so enthralled by the system of the body. It is so miraculous. I wish I could if I could download one thing into all of you in this moment, it would be the sensation of witnessing the miracle of a human body in its intricacies. Like, if I could, it is so beyond any moments where I become depressed, which is relatively frequent in the world I live in right now. In any little sense of loss of hope or sense of depression or why am I here, I can just kind of tap back into this experience of being witness to the miracle of life, being witness to the extraordinary design of a human body. And it's beyond goosebumps. It feels like champagne in my bones. Like, it's just like this effervescent rising of energy in my body, because it is so beautiful, y'all. It is just so exquisite. Each of you in the knitted web of life within each of you is so beyond your imagination of how perfect it is, down to the tissue planes, the fascia, and the relationship to bone, and the beauty of living bone. I wish you could see living bone. It looks like pearls. It's got this pearlescent, glowing quality to it. Like the brain, the living brain, when you see that in neurosurgery, it's insane. It literally, you can feel like you can see the electricity coursing across the surface of a brain in its living form. The first time I got to hold a beating heart in my hand during a cardiac bypass surgery, like, you can't even imagine the strength of that muscle pounding away in your hand. And like, that's what I would love to impart to you, is you are a freaking miracle, and you're here right now, the tipping point of all things. And thank goodness you're here, because we need every neuron of wisdom to enter into the human experiment right now, because we have to change absolutely everything we're doing. And to do that, we have to do it with the collective consciousness of humanity. There is no single intellect that can solve a problem. Elon Musk will not get us out of our problems. We have to have a collective community intelligence that emerges as to who we are, what we're here to do, and understand ourselves greater than the human community, understand ourselves back into this natural system of life on Earth, and realize we are not the pinnacle species. We've never actually had a beneficial effect on nature when we put ourselves as the keystone species we always destroy. When we step down and we allow keystone species of the sharks to take over waterways again, the wolves to take over Yellowstone, the white lions to take over northern South Africa, suddenly life just emerges from what was moments before was dead ecosystems. And so we need to realize that the biologic hierarchy does not start and end at humanity. We are here to be witness to the beauty of nature, not to extract and destroy her. And so we are here to be part of a global community, and I'm just thrilled to be with all of you and just know that you're a miracle.
There's like 50 million ideas. I friggin' love you. That's just so awesome. You're sat there with a beating heart in your hand. You are understanding yourself as a systems guy within like an allopathic context, right? Within a traditional medicinal context. What was the moment? Tell us about the moment that you jumped the rails. Tell us the moment that you were like, oh shit, this is all upside down and back to front.
Oh, there was quite a few of those moments, unfortunately, and fortunately, there was many of these moments where my world deconstructed. But I'll give you one. I was developing chemotherapy at the University of Virginia. I decided I was going to, be a part of this new future of personalized medicine, where we could know your genetics and swab your cheek and sequence your genome and know exactly what diseases you would get, know exactly what drugs you were going to be affected positively by, and which ones you'd be sensitive to and the rest. That was the promise that I stepped into. And when I started my journey in 1992, we were going to be the first generation of doctors that would be able to do this personalized medicine, because we were just about to decode the human genome. In 1996, we would achieve that. And so we had this great promise that things were going to go swimmingly for our generation of doctors. We'd have more impact, positive impact on human health than any generation of doctors before us. And of course, what evolved over the last 25 years of my career is we were the worst, outcomes in history. Never has a generation of doctors been witnessed and been managed, the destruction of human health as fast as we've witnessed it. And so the predictions of 1992 did not come true. And we, in fact, did exactly the opposite, as we became the overseers of the destruction of a species and of a planet in our dedication to our pharmaceutical mindset, which is to say that there's some sort of man-made chemical for everything. And as long as we believed that we were going to outthink nature, we would further accelerate our divorce from that nature. I didn't really get that until I was, 1992, getting into my pre-med studies and all that, and getting this big promise of hope. You fast forward to 2007, some 15 years later, I'm developing a brand new kind of chemotherapy out of vitamin A compounds that was really miraculous. It was turning on a process that was pretty newly understood called apoptosis, which is programmed cell suicide, so that you didn't have to kill the cell. Instead, the cell, realizing it was cancer, would eliminate itself. And so this was a huge new excitement. Wow, what if we could stop poisoning with chemotherapy and we could start, turning on the intelligence of the human body? So I thought I was being super, progressive and non-toxic, and I was so pleased with myself and winning awards and all this kind of university grants and getting all this stuff. And I was being told, oh yeah, you'll be groomed for chair medicine someday, blah, 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 and a huge head trip and ego trip and everything else. I was on a path to really change human life. And I was one of the first, people to get to experience at the university the opportunity to not only, begin the basic science on a molecule for cancer, but I'd take it all the way to clinical trials within just 2 years. So I seemed to be on this accelerated, bullet train to success. And it was my very first patient in that clinical trial that was sitting with me at about 9 o'clock at night. I was so excited. My first patient admitted to the General Clinical Research Center, and it's like a little hospital wing, super quiet, separated from the whole hubbub of the usual hospital scene. And so it almost feels like kind of like an antiquated, really crappy hotel instead of a hospital. But we got him in this woman in there, and she's sitting there, and she has a tumor in the base of her skull, in the pituitary gland, that doesn't have a treatment known to it. And it was a tumor that had failed surgery and all this. And so I was sitting there, so excited to have her here, and we were going to do surgery the next day as a repeat surgery, and I was going to be able to see the efficacy of my drug in real time, because we'd be able to biopsy the results after she got this drug for the first time. And so you can't imagine my excitement walking into that room and like the goosebumpy feel of I was about to see history change. And so I'm sitting there at 9 o'clock at night, absolutely revved, so excited, and then the nurse walks in and shocks me more than even the patient, but shocks both of us when she walks in like what looks like a hazmat suit, carrying these 6 little green capsules in her hand. And I was so shocked, because this is like the first non-toxic chemotherapy ever, but their clinical protocol is for brand new drugs that hadn't been in the market was to do this whole protection of the nurse thing. So she comes in with like mask and face shield and full latex outfit and stretches out her hand, and the patient and I sitting there in our street clothes, and the patient's supposed to reach out and have these 6 capsules dumped in her hand. She's staring at me like, what the hell is going on? Like, I thought why is she dressed like that? And so it totally set me back at the very beginning of trying to convince this woman that this was safe, and I take her through all the science and blah, blah, blah. And within seconds of her sitting there, we reinforced her deep intuition that this was not her solution. And so over the next 45 minutes, I broke her will. I broke her connection to intuition, and I convinced her to swallow those 6 capsules. And I thought it was, I went into that night thinking it was my shining moment as a doctor. And by the end of the night, I realized I had I didn't fully realize it, but the feeling inside of me ended up translating into my understanding that for the first time, I had done the most horrific thing a doctor can do, which is separate an individual from their intuition and from their sense of self in the clinical setting. And I did that through an altruistic belief that my intellect was the answer to this patient's plight with cancer, and that I knew more than her own intuition. And as she sat there struggling with the feeling inside her, is like, I shouldn't swallow these 6 capsules, and me trying to convince her she should, she asked an incredibly poignant question, which was, what does this medicine have to do with the reason I got cancer? And that stopped me in my tracks, and suddenly realized in a couple seconds, actually, there's no case of cancer in history of mankind that was caused by a lack of chemotherapy. And that suddenly started rearranging my whole medical career, and realized there's not a single drug we've ever created for any disease that sits at the root cause of why the condition occurred in the first place. And so devastatingly, that was the beginning of the end of a 17-year march through academia, $200,000 of school debt, and my kids starting to move towards college themselves, and all this. And I became majorly depressed in the next 24 months there, just realizing that I had lost any sense of groundedness or direction. So that root cause question was one of the major turning points in my life. And fortunately, I was studying vitamin A, and that started getting me interested in nutrition as perhaps a foundational approach. And from nutrition, I got into soil because I left the university in 2010, started a nutrition center for reversing chronic disease with food. And within 2 years of that, realized that the health food of the 1970s, kale, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, was actually making my patients sicker, and I couldn't figure out why. And so that got me into soil and got me into the science of glyphosate, which is the most abundant herbicide or chemical spray that we put on plants. And that got me into the microbiome, which really answered, kind of connected all the dots suddenly. Because in the late 2000s, when I was doing my chemotherapy research, we had started to hear rumbles that all these crazy hippie doctors out in California were starting to map the biome genetics of the gut, and we were starting to realize that you could map human disease, including cancers, depending on changes in the microbiome of the gut soil. And that was so disruptive to the model of cancer. We had absolutely no idea how those two could possibly be related, that we kept saying, well, that's just correlation. There must be some toxin in the environment that's making cancer and the microbiome disappear. And as I started studying soil, discovered in 2012 a family of molecules that looked a bit like the chemotherapy I used to make. And it was the sudden connection of, oh my God, there's medicine in the soils. And we lost this entire data bank of medicine and health within the soils when we started using chemical agriculture. And so that brought me full circle by 2014, realized that we had not only a crisis, but a huge opportunity to reconnect human health back to soil systems within our gut and within our greater ecosystems to reverse the chronic disease epidemic that was taking us to our knees as a species.
Can I just make sure, Chip, I know you've got a question as well, but can I just make sure I understand what you just said? What's going on in the soil biome, what's going on in the soil is essentially going on in our guts, and there's a direct relationship to that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the stunning realization that we have coming out of all the genomics of our science of the last 15 years, is that we used to believe the human system was a human system, and now we're understanding that human life expresses itself in a continuum of life and is expressed by this continuum of life. The genetics that I received from my parents is only 20,000 genes, and yet my body expresses 400,000 proteins to make a human body in all of its beauty and miraculous nature that I described to you. And so in 1996, when we thought we were going to become personalized medicine experts and we'd swab your cheek and know everything about you, we suddenly realized we didn't even understand genetics. We thought from Watson and Crick's that one gene makes one protein and that makes a human body. We suddenly realized in 1996 that we had completely the wrong model, that somehow the genome that we inherit from our parents isn't even the template for life. It's more like a hardware store where it's a lot of options to go buy some stuff, but it doesn't build the house. It's not we thought it was the blueprint for your biology, but there's something deeper and more intelligent than the human genome. To put it in perspective, a flea has 30,000 genes and you only have 20,000 genes. So a fruit fly has 13,000 genes. So to find out that you're between a fruit fly and a flea genetically was really disappointing. And so that completely put us back at kind of ground zero of what the hell is DNA, where is it coming from, how does it express itself into genomics and proteomics, and how does it ultimately express the intelligence of a human system. And that's taken us into the soil of the gut. And ultimately we find out that the soil of the gut is a continuum of our interaction with nature. So the air we breathe, the water we drink, the water we bathe in, the soils we eat from, the soils we touch, the soils we consume in our food, on our root vegetables and the like, that does become the microbiome of our soil system.
Yeah.
And so we are continuous with our connection with soil. What happens when you take 2 generations, 3 generations of people and stop them from gardening, stop them from touching the soil, stop them from interacting with the planet in any natural system? Now they're breathing air-conditioned air all day long in their home, in their car, in their office. They never breathe fresh air. They haven't been in a forest but for once a year. They haven't been to waterfalls but for once a year. They haven't been to a beach in 3 years. They suddenly are denuded of their connection to nature. It means they develop monoculture and they lose the biodiversity of life within them as they become disconnected from their nature. And so what we see as a chronic disease epidemic is another name for disconnect from nature.
Mm. One of the challenges I have with this, Zach, and I love what you're saying, and I love this sort of this linearity between soil and the gut biome, my own health, what I eat, what I touch, how I interact with the natural world as a part of that natural world, right? I'm a systemic part of that natural world. You know, I didn't know what seraphim meant, so I had to look it up before this call.
You went down a rabbit hole here.
I went down a rabbit hole, and it's the highest order of angel. It's a sort of an angelic being, and there were these sort of words around light and thriving and so on that describe the seraphim. Take us down the rabbit hole. Go on, take us down that crazy rabbit hole.
Oh man, so yeah, I was a quirky kid growing up. Didn't have a whole lot of friends, but had great friends. The few that I had were soulmates, and so grew up kind of out of the context of the normal social world. I never went to a party as a teenager, and I never went to a frat party as a college kid. I was very disconnected from my peers in that way. And I had this core group of friends. We went through scouts together. We built things together. We built cars. We built houses. We built stuff all the time. And in that protected space of this core little group that was evolving outside of normal social paradigms, our dominant music was from the 1950s and 60s. I was completely isolated away from the grunge depression of the 1990s music and all that through college and beyond. So that little bubble that I grew up in, I think, prepared me for seeing the world differently. And people have argued that maybe I have autism or maybe I have severe dyslexia. I have neither, as far as I know. But I think they see me acting outside of normal social paradigms, and I think it was because of the tribe that I clung to in those years. It helped me to think differently. And one of those communities that I was really deeply connected to was the hippie church that I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, and they had a unique structure, in the modern church system, in that there was no pastor, but it was basically built on the first book of Acts, which delineated how churches should be built without hierarchical leadership. And basically, the elders are supposed to help share the teaching responsibilities, and they're supported by a board of deacons that are responsible for kind of shepherding the flock and making sure everybody's nutrient rich within the community. And so we built a church without a pastor in Boulder, Colorado. And so I grew up in this space, and it was really steeped in apologetics. So we studied Hebrew and Greek, and it would take us a whole year to get through the book of John, for example, because it was one verse at a time, dissect the Greek, dissect the Hebrew, depending on Old Testament, New Testament source, and really come to understand the words that were there, and the impact of translation into the English language for maybe the loss of the substance that was within the wisdoms of ancient scriptures. And so it was a non-denominational church. Question popping across what denomination there. So non-denominational church called Hillside Church of the Savior there in Boulder. Interesting situation. It wasn't actually started by hippies. It was started to save the hippies. It was started by a bunch of Teamsters out of Detroit who were looking at the lack of productivity and lack of care of work ethic in hippies, and thought, this is the end of our country. If these crazy hippies keep doing drugs and having sex, we're never going to have a country left. So these Teamsters left Detroit and went to Boulder, Colorado to start a church to save the hippies. And my dad was one of those hippies on the streets of Boulder that got grabbed by Red, who was his approach to evangelism was at 6'4" and like 320 pounds. He would simply pick up a skinny hippie by one hand and throw him against the wall and said, "I'm going to beat the crap out of you. You don't come to church on Sunday night. We're going to feed you dinner and you're going to listen to the message." So my dad was working in a donut shop, and his roommate was working at the pizza shop. So they were living off of donuts and pizza. So a free meal sounded pretty good, and red seemed pretty intimidating. So he went to church on Sunday night for the first time, and radically changed his life that night. And so I grew up in that little church, and so I thought, I was really dialed into, a wisdom base, dialing way back, and I was very overly evangelistic and confident about my own spirituality back at the time. And then of course had to go through a reconstruction of my sense of spirituality, coming into adulthood and going through life as a doctor was a big deal. Like I was a hospice doctor after my other two subspecialties in internal medicine, endocrinology and metabolism, then hospice palliative care. And in that third subspecialty of hospice care, I was watching 80 patients die a week in my service. And when you're seeing that much death and dying, and I saw it even before that when I was running ICUs at the University of Virginia, I was seeing so many people crossing the veil and coming back from near-death experiences, that they were coming back with stories that just did not compute even to my pretty open-minded spirituality that had come out of my church and all that. So all of that's a very long-winded answer to your question of like, what the hell is seraphim? And so the seraphim were these four creatures in the scriptures that are pretty much the most terrifying thing you've ever heard described as spiritual beings. The Hindu religion has, a lot of 6-armed creatures and all of this that are pretty intimidating. But when you read about seraphim, it's like, these things tear apart the fabric of the universe every time they move. In the first book of Ezekiel, there's this description of what the kingdom of heaven looks like, and it describes these 4 seraphim. And they are such horrifically powerful creatures that when they move their wings, it sounds like the tearing of the universe. So it's these creatures that are supposed to carry out the will of the collective intelligence and will of the universe that we might call God. And so when I set out to start a company that was going to change everything, I decided to hearken to these seraphim, and I came across the word seraphic, which means befitting of the seraphim. So we're here to be something that tears the fabric of the universe that we live in right now, to find the beauty beneath.
Zach, you must be amazing at a cocktail party, because you cannot have a superficial conversation. I mean,
not invited to cocktail parties.
Not invited to cocktail parties. I have 2 questions. I'm going to we'll go back to Jeff in a moment, because I actually want to bring it to MEA curriculum for a moment. When I heard you speak outside Mexico City, you talked about curiosity. And curiosity, we believe a modern elder is somebody who's as curious as they are wise. And as we get older, we learn what's the right alchemy between curiosity and wisdom. What does this moment need? More curiosity, more wisdom. So I want you to talk about curiosity, but I also want you to talk about the U curve of happiness. And again, for those who don't know it, the U curve of happiness is social science research that's come out in the last 5-10 years that's shown that around 45 to 50, on average, your mileage may vary, people bottom out with their life satisfaction between 45 and 50, and then it gets better with each decade after that. So I want to hear your perspective on how curiosity serves us as humans. And then I want to get your perspective on the U curve of happiness for the planet, if you don't mind.
Love it. Yeah. So if you go to my website, the landing page there, Zach Bush, MD, is the whole first banner is curiosity, is the spark of humanity, basically. So I'm always eager to discover evidence of divinity, which is to say a design greater than ourselves. And so what is the design greater than the biology that we express in my brain and in my tissues and the way I move my arms to build a car or whatever it is? Like, what's greater than that? And the answer is in this curiosity phenomenon, that if I, in my 5 senses, are not completely overwhelmed by the beauty of the universe I live in, and I dare to imagine a 1955 Chevy, then what the hell am I? What is it coming out of me that would want to build something that does not exist in the experience of humanity, which is so rich, so overwhelmingly diverse in its inputs, that we would imagine something that's not in the rainforest yet? And so the very fact that we've developed a world that goes beyond the natural systems that we lived in is, despite its destructive qualities and the ways in which it is ultimately the demonstration that we have something within us that is a creative force that is so powerful and so irrepressible that my work, I was just over in Africa for weeks and then in India for a couple of weeks. And then every time you go into one of these, squatter villages or temporary communities, as they now try to rebrand them as or whatever, but you go into the most abject poverty in the Philippines or in South Africa or Botswana or Delhi, the freaking creativity and curiosity coming out of those places is irrepressible. It doesn't make any sense. There's no reason these people should have any hope, let alone curiosity and creativity left. And yet it's the most evident down at the very fabric of society. And I think that as you drive into the millionaire, homes and gated communities of South Africa, you see the loss of curiosity and creativity, and everything looks monotonous. Everybody's car looks like the car next door. Everybody's kids are dressed the same way. All the fences that are their own self-devised prisons keep them isolated from the world in the same way as their neighbor. And then you go just around the corner and there's this tin shanty town things, and there's 5 generations of people milling around with pigs and chickens, and they're laughing, and there's soccer balls being kicked around and kids taking care of kids, and nobody's worried about security because everybody knows each other. And so there's a web of life happening because of the closeness of life to that. The kids are making soccer balls out of packed plastic bags that they pack together and then tape up into perfect soccer balls. And they're so creative, like, no matter how much you reduce the civilization away from humanity, it's expressing a creative force within it. And so I believe our God force is creativity. And when you tap into that, you change your neurochemistry irrevocably. And I think that's what happened when I saw that infant come to life in my hands is, holy shoot, if I could be part of that system, of the animation of biology with a life force within it. What is that life force? Because that kid did not have a life force, and then suddenly did in my hand, and I felt the difference. It wasn't that it took a breath, it's that I felt electricity shoot through my hand the moment it took that breath. What was the electromagnetic field that kid generated with its first breath? What was that life force like? And that curiosity drove me into medicine. And medicine ultimately tried to build me a reductive system of belief that said that humans need human solutions. And for that, I found myself lonely, depressed, and not effective, and ultimately being a force of terror and fear for my patients so that they would swallow the drugs I was creating. And that was the only way I could get them to swallow the drugs, if I put enough fear in them. And so that was not the person I wanted to become. And so I had to back myself back to this reality of I am connected to nature, and I am a sovereign being, and I am curious. And so what can I create? And so that's where Revolution Health Center and Seraphic Group and Resource Dynamics and Atlantis and all these companies I've spawned in these recent years are all coming out of this driven curiosity and sense of purpose within the curiosity. Sorry, Chip.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say curiosity and fear are pretty much arch enemies, but talk about the U curve of happiness briefly. And then we're going to go to Jeff for a last question, and we're going to open it up to the audience for raising your hand using the function at the bottom of your screen for some questions from the group. So U curve of happiness for the planet. Yeah. Explain that for a moment.
Yeah. So this was something that came out of me listening to Chip, so it was a new thought, and so you're going to get exposed here to a new thought, which is always kind of fun because it's not going to be perfectly expressed perhaps, and it's going to allow you to start to fill in the brushstrokes for yourself to paint this reality, because I think it's really profound observation that was made between these two talks. But basically what I realized as he was speaking, and as I started to speak on the planet and the condition that we're currently in the midst of our 6th extinction, we've desertified, massive, over 1/3 of the land of the earth has been turned into a desert due to agricultural practices. And so we're losing the function of the planet for it. We're going to lose another 1/3 in the next 20 years if we don't change our behavior. So if you look at the U curve of biology, it's certainly, we're on the downward trend. And we'll probably flatten out somewhere around a loss of 90 to 97% of life on Earth, where most extinctions kind of level out and then they come back. So there's a U curve to everything, right? The extinction leads to an explosion of life and beauty beyond. And we should go into that at some point as how beautiful things could get in these next centuries by doing the upward tack on that U. But it made me realize that the mental health of a 49-year-old plummeting down to their most depressed state is exactly where we're at with humanity in the last decade. I think we became so isolated and therefore depressed in our social structures, our social behaviors, that we have manifested this low state of biology, i.e. this low state of neurotransmitter function, i.e. the depression of humanity. And in depression, we become numb. We can't feel appropriately. If you've ever been majorly depressed, it's terrifying when you look at your children in the face and you can't remember the feeling of being in love with your own children. That's major depression. And that's why you kill yourself, is you can't figure out why you should exist as a human being if you can't even feel the love for your own children, because you are so numbed out and so disconnected from life. And so that suicidality that runs in major depression is now evident in humanity. Certainly we have the highest suicide rates, in history, and interestingly, it's doctors and farmers that have the highest suicide rates in our modern society, as we are the arbiters of separation from nature and our dedication to being the arbiters of fear. And ultimately, the flip side of fear is guilt and shame if necessary. So we'll use fear, guilt, and shame to become effective in our mission as peddlers of chemical reality. And in that, we become very depressed. And so the depression of humanity now, as we are all become purveyors of chemical inputs, we consume plastics at obscene rates, fossil fuels, like you name it, we are the consumptive, destructive chemical force on the planet. And for that, we are all depressed to some degree. 25% of Americans, 25% of American adults are on a mood stabilizing drug right now, this second. And so that's an extraordinary number. 50% will have severe clinical major depression in their lifetime, but 25%, 1 in 4, is currently on an antidepressant, anti-anxiety, sleep med, etc. And most of them are on multiple. And so we are so sick right now as a population. If 1 in 4 people can't figure out why they should be alive right now, that's not a description of vitality as a species. And so we are losing that spark of life. We're at that flattening point, that at the bottom of the U curve. To what end? And so, or how did we get here? Maybe this is something that came through in your lecture, Chip, is that you'd said that this is kind of you spent decades doing what you thought was the right thing to become successful, and you feel hollow at the end of that journey. And in the next 2 decades, you have the opportunity to birth what's important to you and find your metrics of value. And what I was thinking about as a planet is, wow, we have a society that was told to march to the following metrics of success that were all extractive, destructive at their foundation, all of them inherently disconnected from natural systems. And so every dollar we achieved, we were creating something. There's certainly that aspect. But almost at the more personal level, is you have spent the last few decades, once you get to 48, building somebody else's description of an ideal world. And so you became an employee that moved up the ranks. You became a student that moved up the ranks of academia. You became such and such that would move up into somebody else's definition of reality. Mm-hmm. And in the next few decades, if you become a joyful 70-year-old, it's because you created your own reality. You said, no, screw all that. I'm going to be me. I'm going to express myself here. I'm going to go start this company. I'm going to start doing my art. I'm going to stop this relationship that's been abusive for 30 years, whatever it is. And you go express self. And then you find joy, and you find purpose, and you find a sense of grounding in the universe, and you create your own reality. We have been marching as cogs in a machine to build a reality that was not us. We were building a reality based on our fear of separation from nature, and therefore the belief of scarcity. We built a world based on the belief of scarcity in a universe that is abundant. And so our next iteration as humanity could put us on the upward curve of the U if we start to build the reality that we all know is possible in our hearts, which is a connected reality in which we are not disconnected from nature, and therefore there is only abundance, and in the abundance there's only the desire of gifting. And so then we see a whole society that behaves more like a Burning Man camp than Wall Street.
Jeff.
Just the idea of a whole society behaving like a Burning Man camp just gave me the chills. But I get where you're going there, Zach.
I've never been a Burning Man, so I'm probably not the one to ask. I don't get invited to cocktail parties either.
I love this idea of the neurochemistry of creativity, and Chip and Zach, this sort of idea that maybe the bridge to regenerating yourself in midlife and beyond, and then the bridge to regenerating your planet is somehow connected to that kind of neurochemistry of creativity. I friggin', oh, we could get not a cocktail party, but definitely like dinner or something like
Yeah,
that.
that's a big one right there. That's a really important one right there. And I think, if I was going to try to answer that in a nutshell before we move to Q&A here with the group, but
Well,
in a
that wasn't my
nutshell,
question, but
oh, that's not your
answer this
question.
nutshell, because my nutshell question is this. So I've done this. I've listened to you, and I find myself flailing, Zach. I find there's this like you've just gone so far and so deep into all this work that I'm like, okay, crap, this is amazing. This all resonates with me, and I know that this guy's onto something that's profoundly important to me. Where I get lost is what do I do next? What do
Mm.
I what are the sort of three things that I actually do next? And what I've heard is, curiosity, creativity, fabulous. I'm all over that. Get dirty, fantastic. I love to get dirty. I've got a little farm that I can go and play on and get that. Get biomed, right? I've heard you in other talks talk about like have animals, have pets, have dogs. Get biome connected, get natural connected. And then and like if what's in the soil is what's in my gut, what the hell do I eat? I've heard you talk about fermented goods like kimchi and stuff like that. But what I don't understand is the relative importance of these steps, right? If I only have a sort of a limited bandwidth, what do I need to do now in terms of patch myself up so I can go out and then look at those wider purposes around regenerating the planet?
We have, I've distilled the 12 years of experience in my clinic and nutrition and beyond, which moved way beyond nutrition. We became an energy medicine center, so we were doing ancient Chinese medicine as well as scalar wave technologies and all kinds of crazy stuff that we tried over the years. And in the end, we found out that anytime you externalize your pursuit of health, you fail.
Mm,
You could be a biohacker or you can be a pharmaceutical expert. Either one is going to fail if it believes health is external to itself. And so in the end, our first step is to understand that health becomes from within. Your sense of self comes from within. And so we've distilled our whole clinical experience down to an 8-week program called Journey of Intrinsic Health, which is to say that health is inherent to the biology within you, which is to say it is inherent to the design within you. And there is a thrive state that is ready to emerge from you. And it is not going to be manifest by more data spreadsheets from your Aura ring about your sleep patterns.
mhm.
And so the biohacking community, just like our functional medicine doctors, have taken us further down the avenue of externalizing your description of health or your understanding of health and where it comes from. And so the Journey of Intrinsic Health, and even our supplement company, we make these supplements out of soil. It's the very first product to be sold as a dietary supplement that does absolutely nothing to your body. Instead, it is the communication network between the cells of your body. It's the wireless network that makes the cells that helps the cells talk to one another, that then allows your own health to emerge. You take vitamin C, it's a delivery of hydrogen peroxide, sterilizes your gut, damages cell systems so that you respond with an injury response, which could be good. Maybe vitamin C has helped you. But as far as taking a dietary supplement or a vitamin or any of these things day in and day out, you're trying to do a bunch of micromanagement to a system that's so far more eloquent than you can possibly imagine. And so we found ourselves very fortunate to understand that bacteria and fungi allow life to emerge from soil systems and its diversity and intelligence by not micromanaging it, instead only fostering possibility. And so when you drink Ion, which is the liquid supplement for the gut, or you spray it on your skin with the skin support or up your sinuses with the sinus spray, what you're doing is saying, what do you want to express today as a community? And the body in community does miraculous rates of healing that have never been imagined before. The first time we put this in cell systems, it was like bonkers. I'd been studying, cancer cells in petri dishes for years, and the first time we put this stuff on breast cancer, we couldn't have even imagined what was happening, because it wasn't about killing anything. It was about reconnecting a civilization, and we saw life emerging from petri dishes that we didn't even know was possible for a petri dish to grow. And so we saw intelligence within cell systems because the communication was restored. And I want you guys to think about that at the macro level. The wisdom between you all, once in community, will create a new civilization of vitality at the macro
Mm.
level. What we've seen under microscopes is what will happen to humanity when we connect. when we get communication networks fully open and supported. And so what we've learned under the microscope is what we see at the macro community level. And the Elder Academy is a good example of some of the solutions that we have at hand, Chip.
Speaking of the Elder Academy, I want to give some opportunity for people to ask questions. But before we go to the questions, we have a pop quiz for you. This is a pop quiz for anybody who actually would like to go to the Paul Hawken Regenerating Soil and Soul Workshop, which is 5 nights long. It's a mastery week, a month from now here in Baja, November 21st to the 26th. We're going to give 1 space away for free. We only have 5 spaces left available. So definitely go if you want to go and you don't win this prize. Go. It's a great way to spend Thanksgiving together down here in Mexico. Here is the question. The person who answers this first correctly gets a $5,500 experience as a single occupancy person at the MEA with Paul Hawken. It is the following question.
Do they type it in, or do they answer? How do they answer?
They type it in. Type it in to chat. Who is attributed as being the person who coined the term regenerative agriculture? And it is not Paul Hawken, although his book Regeneration is spectacular.
Jeff Hamaoui, Einstein.
No, that's nobody yet. Let's see. Keep going. No.
Guesses. Good guesses.
Oh, there.
Oh,
Throw down.
Ian.
Helena.
Ian is our winner.
Helena, one of our MEA. In fact, I think Helena, were you actually in one of the Paul Hawken workshops?
Was it Helena or Ian? Okay.
Oh, who was first? Oh.
Oh,
It wasn't
first?
Alan
Drum
Saber,
roll.
just for the record.
It's Rodale. So the answer is Rodale.
I saw Ian Michael Farkas, but I could be wrong. We'll double check.
With the honourable
let's see.
mention
Oh, no,
to
actually,
George
it is.
Washington.
It's Helena right before Ian Marcus.
Helena.
Ian Michael. Oh, Ian Michael.
that's okay. It can be Helena too if I won.
Yes. Wait, were you in the Paul Hawken workshop before? Do you want to give it away to someone else, or do you want to actually come?
May I give it away? Because right
You-
now we're
you'd
working.
Give it away. You would give it away to Ian Michael, the next person online.
I can't give it away. I would want to.
What's that?
There's a negotiation at play.
We will
here, Chip.
talk to you separately. That's good. Okay, I like it. All right. Now let's go to questions. We're going to start with Samuel. Samuel, how are you?
Good. Hey, Chip. How are you? Hey, Jeff. How are you guys? So nice
Hey,
to see
Samuel.
you. Zach, pleasure meeting you. Oh my gosh. We should have like a seminar in MEA from everything that's spun off of this conversation, because there are many topics. But Zach, thank you so much for your presentation. I just want to share my thoughts, and I want to bounce a little bit and try to wrap it up within the context of the MEA community and things at large. Because, and I want to take it up from where you left it, which was about interconnectivity. I remember once I was listening to you, and you were very smartly, you were pointing out how you were doing experiments in your lab, and you were isolating cells. And by the time that you were isolating cells, these cells would go into chaos. And I think you would say they would go psychotic or something like that. And the first time I heard that thing, and obviously because we cannot study things separate by itself, that we came to this reductionist, materialistic, separate juncture in time where we are right now. But the first thing that came to my mind when were you mentioning that is that if we know that in your petri dishes where you're doing these experiments, cells go chaotic and they go psychotic when they're by themselves, by gosh, if we are able to extrapolate that same mentality of the cells, and we are constituted about trillions and trillions of cells, of course, we're made of the same elements. And if we're isolated, we're also going to become chaotic, and we're going to get psychotic, and we're going to get depressed. And pretty much everything that you said in the last half an hour, it's happening. And another thing that I correlated, just because this happened recently, actually, the Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to quantum physics. And in quantum physics, when they were giving the awards, they also showed, obviously, how at the subatomic level, even if the particles don't know each other, they are also entangled. And obviously, if we run this theory across the whole spectrum, yes, we know everything is unified, as you said, and as you pointed out.
Well, you have to like get to your question.
Yeah. So my thoughts, and actually, it's my thought, because the way we see it from the minimum to the point is, if we are to thrive, and this is just a point I want to come across, as we're maturing in life, as we're coming through the next step, how do you see and how do we apply it? I mean, I have my own thoughts that we have to live in community, that we have to connect with the soil because we're systems within systems. I just want to bounce your idea in regards to this whole thing, and I want to take a lot of the time from the talk.
Very good.
But,
Yeah,
but
no,
I
you're spot
to
on.
start these things on.
You're spot on. Yeah. You know, we use the word malignant in a lot of different ways, right? And so cancer is a cell that's become isolated. You reconnect that cell to its environment, it stops being cancer. And so that's what we got to see when we put the wireless communication network together. Suddenly cancer cells, for the first time, were starting to reconnect. And that was a pretty amazing story of the grace of nature, that nature is capable of reconnecting human cells once disconnected, is phenomenally interesting at the macro level. We just went through a pandemic, and our answer to pandemic was, oh, everybody go get isolated. That was exactly the wrong choice, right? If we had said instead, oh my God, everybody go on a massive camping trip together out in nature, we would have solved the whole thing in 6 weeks, because in nature, breathing clean air, we would not have had a pandemic. It was staying in artificial environments that a respiratory virus became so caustic. And so we did exactly the wrong thing. But you can see that at the behavior level as well. You know, we have, you know, elders climbing up towers in Las Vegas, shooting 250 strangers dead. How does that malignant behavior happen? Through isolation. And so from school shootings to, you know, Vegas shootings to the rest, ultimately it's a story of isolation. And that's what terrorist groups know worldwide, is the mechanism of creating terror is to isolate an individual and then shift their psychology to radicalism. And so to radicalize somebody, you have to first isolate them. And so at every level of human behavior, you see isolation as the beginning of dysfunction, cancer cell or human in isolation from their community.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to, from here forward, I'm going to just ask the questions. Carol had the question of, would love to know your point of view on blue zone regions. How can they help to move our connections with nature? If you're familiar with Dan Buettner, who's actually teaching at MEA next spring, any thoughts on blue zones and how they connect us to nature? Zach, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this actually comes back to community. So, you know, we've tried hard to try to reconnect us to a sense of maybe it's the food, you know, maybe it's the food that's eaten in blue zones that helps people live to 100. Maybe it's their socioeconomics, maybe it's their, in the end, what you find is every blue zone has one commonality, is that they have multi-generational experiences at the dinner table every night. And so it doesn't matter what they're eating, it matters who they're eating it with. And if there's a grandparent, a mother, a child in one room, that increases longevity to these extraordinary levels. And so ultimately it is multi-generational community that is the answer to longevity. There's no biohacking community that's ever proved that it's beneficial to biohack. And yet we have thousands of blue zones across the world that proves you can live to 100 and beyond, and not only, you know, survive it, but actually thrive at 100 years old because you have a sense of purpose within your connected community. So ultimately biology doesn't drive human longevity. Spirituality drives human longevity. And when I say spirituality, I'm not talking about your pursuits at church. I'm talking about your sense of spiritual alignment to self, this reconnectedness to self, just as you would reconnect to nature. And the only way you can reconnect to self is look in the mirrors of multiple generations to see who you are. And if you're not looking into the face of a grandmother, you don't know who you are. If you're not looking into the face of a child or a newborn, you don't know who you are, literally. And so look into the face of a child today, look into the face of an elder today, and you will find more about yourself.
So on that note, because I know we have to wrap in a moment, perfect timing. Generations Over Dinner, guys, something we MEA helped to create last month, and it's gone global with hundreds of dinners happening with as many, Carrie was at a dinner or a lunch in Denver a couple of weeks ago with 7 generations at the table. In the Blue Mountains of Sydney, Australia, we had a 7-generation dinner that went on. So check out on the MEA website under programs, Generations Over Dinner. It's free to participate in it. It's amazing. And it's exactly what Zach's talking about here. Well, Jeff, I'm going to let you do the wrap here, and then we're going to pass on to Carrie. And thank you, Zach.
Appreciate being here with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what a fantastic talk, Zach, and a ton of inputs, a ton of resources. For those of you that are looking for next steps, there was a ton dumped into the chat. We did mention Rodale Institute, Zach's own website has just a huge amount of links and cross-references. Anything else, Zach, in terms of beyond taking your course and beyond buying your supplements that people should be looking at?
Yeah, if you want to get involved in the reformation of the food system, then farmersfootprint.us is the website there with all of the connectedness to our impact in regenerative agriculture. And if you're in the space of impact investing, family offices, or private equity, then Biome Capital Partners is a good way to get involved in a radical change in the food system there. And so Journey of Intrinsic Health, intelligenceofnature.com, all of these websites can give you further access to it. If you're interested in any of the stuff I just talked about and you want a deeper dive on the science side, I have a bunch of free 35 hours of education on my website called the Global Health Education Summits. And they continue to happen quarterly. And they take a look at things like death, heart disease, autism, and completely flip your paradigm. Like, I guarantee you will not watch a single one of those that doesn't radically change your idea of what you thought was real. Every one of them is extremely disruptive. Some of them are didactic, largely with me talking to you for 3-4 hours at a time on viruses or things like that. But there's also incredible panels that look at the topic of death and dying or autism and the like. And so the panels of experts that we bring together there are just so revolutionary in their understanding of their fields that it will fundamentally change not just your understanding, but also your hope. And so Global Health Education Summit on the Zach Bush MD website.
Carrie Cardinale.
Wow, that was amazing, literally. Thank you so much, the 3 of you. That was an extraordinary conversation. The thank yous are pouring in the chat. Thank you all for being here. You can watch the recording of this conversation on our YouTube channel. It'll be prepared and up in a little while. Of course, if you have any questions, you can always email me, Carrie@modernelderacademy.com, and we're going to wrap. So thank you so much, Zach. Thank you, Chip. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, all of you. Have a good rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Zach.
you.
Thank you, everybody.